Welcome to another episode. Mikey on mute, your mind's implode. He's coming off mute for you. Feel the vibe, it's something new.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Mikey on Mute. As always, I'm your host Mikey, coming off mute to talk to you about my mental health journey and share my story with others trying to get their side and their perspective as well. Today I am so excited because the whole mission of the podcast has been to really break out that toxic masculinity, talk to other people about their struggles, their journeys, and this person I found on Instagram, and I will say it is my self-proclaimed fanboy moment here, which definitely got a laugh out of my guest. We'll talk to him later about that. Today, I want to introduce you to Will. On Instagram, it is Mental Health with Will. After experiencing a tragic loss of a partner and battling some of his own personal demons, Will has grown to care deeply about having open and very frank conversations around mental health. He believes in a common sense approach to tackling your demons and the importance of moving forward one step at a time. As a result, he's made it his mission to share his story in the hopes that it'll show others they're not alone, and perhaps encourage them to share theirs as well. If this sounds familiar, I was talking to Will. This is something that's very important to me, so everybody, please welcome in Will Craig to the Mikey on Mute podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mikey.
Absolutely, Will. Again, I joked about it. We talked about it a little bit. My kind of fanboy moments here to have Will on here. I really enjoy your approach to things, and so it was very exciting for me to be able to kind of latch onto this opportunity. I'm glad that you got a good laugh out of it.
I did. I assure you, I am no one worth fanboying about. I'm just a guy who makes videos, and odds are people laugh at it, and I'm okay with it because I cared so deeply about this topic and so deeply about everything you described, like these open and frank conversations, that it's just wild to me how much this has grown and what people have had conversations about, and I don't know, I'm just really excited to be here.
Absolutely. I know that one of the big things that's important to you and to me is authenticity and vulnerability, really breaking down that stigma. It's amazing to see in the last few years the shift in society and paying a little bit more attention to mental health. It's not quite to the point that all of us would like it to be, but it's amazing to see. And I wonder, I just thought of the top of my head, is there anything that you can think of in the last few years that might have been like a catalyst for society talking more about this?
I definitely think the pandemic had a huge play in America, and really the world too. I think, a lot of us, it's very easy in life to kind of just coast through when you have all these things going on, your work life, your personal life, all these different things happening all at once, converging at one time. And if you're dealing with something internally, it's very easy to stay distracted. Hell, our phones can be a great distraction in many ways. And so if you have all these things going on, but then the world kind of stopped for a period of time where we were just, okay, I'm now alone with my thoughts. And that's a really dark place to be at times, especially if you're someone who's had a lot of things brewing, but hasn't really quite bubbled up to enough to really deal with it. That's a really strange place. And so I think that was a huge catalyst in the last few years to say, hey, I've got some things going on in my body or my mind that I'm not really sure what to do with. I know I need to do something. I just don't know what yet. And that kind of forged, a whole fledge of different people trying and opening conversations and trying to explore their minds.
Yeah, it seems to be about the time. I know that the pandemic really kind of kicked off when we got closer to late spring, early summers, when I think the world, at least America here, took it a little bit more, I say seriously with air quotes, because obviously I have my own thoughts on how they handled things, but it's interesting because it aligns for me personally. I had my inpatient stay in April 2020, had nothing to do with the pandemic. It just kind of lined up that way. And so coming out of inpatient and into a world that is a pandemic, it was quite, I know, it was a lot to handle. And so I'm really glad that that was kind of the time that people started talking about it, because if I had came back out to a world and it was the same one where I'm just used to no one talking about the conversation, I don't know if I'd be where I'm at in my journey today.
So let me ask you this. When you came out, did you find that with everything going on, was it more people talking about mental health that made you comfortable? Or was it the fact that everyone kind of had to deal with their own things, so you got to kind of walk out and be like, hey, I get this time for myself to really dig into my own shit, frankly.
Yeah, great question. It was definitely more of that second one where they were so focused on what was happening in current events that it took the picture off, or the focus off of me, and allowed me that time. Suddenly, with the world being isolated where you had to stay in your home, these were things that worked for me. Now, were those great, techniques, the isolation, all that? No, but I was used to them. So the pandemic was great for me. I could, stay away from everybody, really focus on myself. But like you said, being alone can really, that isolation is twofold. It can be great. I learned some amazing things, like when I'm an inpatient and I wasn't around any distractions, my phone or bad influences or anything like that. That part of being alone is great, but there's also the isolation that can really drive you to a point that you feel really like there isn't anyone out there that can help you.
Yeah, I mean, that's where a lot of my mission comes from, is in our darkest moments, in the places that we don't like to explore in our minds. What, I don't care if it's anxiety, depression, you name it, those moments feed off you feeling alone. They need you to be alone, because when you're alone, you're not so scary. And so I really think about that a lot. And isolation then just feeds into that, right? Like if you have these dark thoughts and you are, maybe you're taking a moment to be by yourself and have these moments, you choose isolation. You can always opt out of that. Or maybe life forces you out. Maybe you have to go to the office every day, or go to your, work site, or maybe you have a very close-knit family, so you're forced into that. But when you can choose isolation, and then the world has committed you to isolation because that's what, for everyone's safety, now you have nothing to do. Those devils inside you can really dance around, and you just are stuck with it. And so I really worry about that, especially as we've kind of come forward in life and the world's gone somewhat back to normal, I suppose. Um, you find yourself in these positions where I've met a lot of people who still very much enjoy the isolation. They very much enjoy their alone time. And I don't have any, not everyone needs to be an extrovert like me, but I worry sometimes about people who it's like pulling teeth to get them to rejoin the world, because I don't know what that can do for their mental health. I'm far from an expert on any of this. I definitely don't possess a PhD in psychology. I'm more thinking anecdotally from my own life. And I know for me, when I was in my darkest places, like, I didn't necessarily want to be around people. And if you're already someone that gravitates that way, I worry a bit about where that takes you.
Yeah, and that's a legit worry. And I don't think you need to have a PhD to have a concern for the common people, or like the common group out there. I think that's where a lot of us, struggle, because we did grow up thinking that the only people that talk about mental health are psychiatrists or therapists. Those are the people that talk about mental health. You don't talk about it with your friends or your family and things like that. At least the way I grew up, that was how it was presented to me. I can't speak for anybody else, but I do think that the pandemic pushed us to be able to talk more, to network more as a communication device. We have a little bit more access to therapy with virtual and remote options, which is great. However, it does kind of lean to that worry. I work from home, so I'm home most of my time between work and I get out of the house to take my sons to sports practices, but other than that, I'm pretty much confined here for most of the day. And so when I do have, like, I check in weekly with my therapist, and he's like, how are things going? And at this point, it's almost like an automatic response of, hey, things are good. Nothing's out of the ordinary. Is that because I've been so, used to it, and it's safe, and this is a commodity for me now. So it does provide some perspective for me to look out at and see, like, am I trying to avoid the world? Is this an active thing, or is this just who I am?
And you touched on a point earlier. You mentioned the whole like you don't necessarily need a PhD to appreciate these things. That's it's funny because people ask me all the time, like, have you ever thought about becoming a therapist or doing things like that? And to me, I don't know about you, but I feel like my role in this conversation is just that. It's the conversation. It's the bridging of the gaps. Because to your point, especially as a man, like we don't talk about these things. And so finding a place in the world where, because I think part of the equation of why people feel uncomfortable is there is this very clinical dialogue that happens in the conversation of mental health, and rightfully so. Like there are tons of research and studies done to address a number of scenarios, but that can feel very daunting to your average everyday person who is just going through something. So I've always found that my role in the conversation is the bridging of the gap. Someone who can speak from a real experience, someone who can talk about lived experience in a way that makes someone else feel less alone. It's the whole reason I started any of this
Mhm.
was in my dark. I've joked about this 1,000 times, but the one true talent that I have in this life is I generally lack shame. And what a waste of that if I don't use it towards something positive, which is, I'll air out my things. I'll talk about the things that I'm not proud of, the moments in my life that I don't particularly like about myself, but I'm learning from it, I'm growing from it, if it means that somebody else feels less alone in their struggle.
Yeah, and that's great. And for you to have that, I know that we joke about superpowers and stuff like that. It really can be, because shame is such a powerful tool. I know that for me personally, shame has really driven the direction I've gone in life, how I've made decisions, what I have done and have not done because of shame. And that's something that I've always personally worked on. So for you to be able to kind of step above that shame, it's got to be great to be that bridge. But like you said, just because you have the ability to be that bridge, if it doesn't work to be a therapist, that doesn't have to be. I think that's very almost black and white. Like we talk sometimes about black and white thinking, and it's like, hey, just let me exist in the gray. Let's have some conversations. That's what I want to do.
Oh, I'm a big believer. Like the gray is very much real. Like I get it. Life is way easier if we can say it's this or that. It's black or white. It's it's very neat and clean to put life into boxes that way. But the reality is most of what we experience in life operates somewhere in the gray.
Yeah.
And your ability to feel comfortable with that mindset is crucial to like enjoying the human experience and being and understanding that like a lot of times the decisions you make are not going to be as cookie cutter as you'd like to believe.
It would be nice if, I always joke, like, if someone could tell me exactly what to do in the correct steps, like, that would make life a lot easier. And
But it would also make it really
understanding,
boring.
it would be boring. It would be super boring if I didn't. I look back and think about it, and someone put it as simply as this to me the other day. They said, if you hadn't gone through the decisions and experiences you did, probably wouldn't be here talking. Like, you wouldn't have a podcast. So understand, and it's one way to look at it. Like, you wouldn't have stories to tell. So I'm thankful that there was a lot of times, as much as I wanted somebody, like, desperately, someone please hold my hand through this. The fact that that didn't happen is going to be so much beneficial. Like, I'm a much better person because of it, and now I want to talk to others and be like, hey, I know it sounds like it would be easy. Like, I know we want to lean on and dump a lot of what's going on, but at sometimes we just have to also kind of be like, hey, you're gonna have to do that shit yourself. You're gonna have to just kind of plow through and see what happens. And it's a weird line because you want to be there, but you also want to make sure you're not holding their hand too much.
No, exactly. I mean, it's. I think a common misconception about confidence is that people assume confident people have just an unbelievable source of self belief, right? Like they just believe, like, oh, like I'm gonna get this done right. Maybe that's true. I'm not saying that those people don't exist, but a lot of the confident people you meet in life, it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with no, I can handle whatever outcome comes from the result of what I do. So if you use like a basketball analogy, it's not that Steph Curry is like, I'm definitely going to make this shot. Maybe he is. Maybe he is the exception to the rule. He's like, you know what, I'm just that good. But most people, it's not about I'm gonna make the shot no matter what. It's whether I make it or I miss it, I can live with whatever outcome. I can live with whatever happens, and I know how to handle that. And I trust myself to guide through those moments. Whether I miss it or I make it, we know what to do. And even if I don't, I'm gonna figure it out. That's where like real confidence, I think, lies. Because even
Yeah.
if you are that person who's just like so blindly in belief of like your own abilities, I would still argue that that person has some flaws there because eventually there's always a bigger fish. There's always something that can unravel you. And if that's all you're basing it off of and you have no coping mechanisms to handle what happens when you don't make the shot, I worry about you long term.
Yeah, you can like to follow up on your analogy. You can get up to that line. You can have the ball, and you can psych yourself up. But if you throw it and it bounces off that rim, and you haven't prepared for what could happen if it doesn't make it, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you made that shot or not. Because if you make it, great, you survived this time. What happens next time?
Exactly. Exactly. It's one of the things that I'm really working on with like friends and it's like I talk about it with my wife. You know, we don't have kids, but it's something we're talking about, and that's one of the things that I think about all the time is like, how do I set them up for success and give them the proper tools to succeed in this life? And I think about it all the time. It's like, you know, I will never ever blame a parent for putting all the guardrails up because your number one job as a parent is to protect your kid, right? And so I understand the parental incentive to say, hey, I'm gonna do everything I can to protect my kid. But there's an unintended consequence if you put too many guardrails up. If you try to protect them from every possible danger that exists in this world, then at some point they never get instilled the confidence to learn how to pick themselves up. And that may not be a problem when they're 12 years old, but it might be a problem when they're 22. You know, they
Yeah.
have to learn how to deal with those things. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is you can throw your kid too much to the fire. And yeah, maybe they learned some good skills along the way, but they never had the support of their parent. That can screw them up too. And so again, I want to be very clear. I don't have kids. I don't pretend to know what it is. And I truly believe outside of a few outliers, the vast majority of any parent is doing everything they can with the information they have available to them to try to make the best outcome. But it is a constant game I practice in my mind of like, how do I set this up where I can instill confidence in them, but know that they're supported? That's
It's
the goal.
such a fine line, yeah, with everything when it
How do you
comes
navigate
to
it? You're a parent.
my boys are 13 and 16. I wish I could sit here and say like I've got it all figured out. I know the code. I've broken it. I I think it's funny that people always give grief and shit to weathermen about, you can do your job and never be right. What about people writing parenting books? There are thousands of parenting books out there that will tell you 12 different ways to handle one situation. You're like, okay, but whose bullshit do I listen to here? So yeah, it's a fine line of just kind of experiencing life and going through and seeing, okay, does this work? No? All right, well, hey, be open and honest. I'm sorry that this didn't work. Let's try something else.
Yeah, I mean you're absolutely right. And by the way, that's not just parenting. It's also like self-help books, you know?
Yeah.
Like how many self-help books can you find that's like, no, this strategy is the way to find happiness. No this, no that. And it's like damn, like what playbook works? And I think the honest answer is there is no one size fits all to anything. whether you're a
Correct.
parent,
Yeah.
because frankly, even among people that have multiple kids, each kid is different.
Hmm.
Some could be completely autonomous and independent. Others are very dependent on you and need more of that other structure, you know? And so so that's your own household, let alone all parents of all kids. And so the same goes for your own personal life. Like to think that the arrogance that someone has to think, no, I have the one master plan that works for literally every person. That arrogance baffles me.
It's crazy. I wish that there was just and there might be out there. I can confidently say I've not read every self help book out there, but I wish someone would just be like, hey, I don't know if this shit works. It worked for me. It might work for you. It might not. Here you go. Like just an honest. These are the kind of conversations I want. Just the honest conversation. I talk to a lot of people. Like they come to me and they go, hey, I do want to know, like, if you were in my situation, how would you handle it? And I'm very frank with them as far as like, I'll tell you how I would handle it. Please don't take it as some sort of scripture. This is not me giving you a step by step of how to do it. So I just want to make sure people are understanding. Like, hey, honestly, no one has it all figured out, and we're just kind of going forward at whatever pace works for us.
It's so funny. And for like my wife who will listen to this later, she'll be like, yep, I know where he's going with this. You started to be like, I wish there was someone that would just say, I don't know, this is what worked for me. So I'm going to do this. And so in my book, this is literally the opening paragraph of my book. I want to make something abundantly clear before we go any further. I am not an expert here. Far from it, actually. I'm here to present you with decades of research. I have no intention of persuading you to share my viewpoint. There is zero part of me that believes I have all the answers. I'm someone who has had to take some tough looks in the mirror, battled some demons, recovered from tragedy, and emerged from all of these actually pretty fucking okay with my existence. That is exactly how I framed it.
I love that. So this is great, and everyone that's listening, it was going to come up at some point, and this is a perfect time for it. Will has a book out there called One Step Forward, Ideally in the Right Direction. You can find it on Amazon. You just heard the opening passage. I'm not lying to you when I tell you guys this is already on my 2025 reading list, and now that I know that's how it starts, that's the opening. If you saw how excited I was to get this podcast set up, I'm super excited to read Will's book even more now. So, actually, I'm glad that you had that there. It worked out perfect.
No, that's what you're describing. The reason I even said it shameless plug, but also I mean this with every fiber of my being. Like that is exactly what inspired me to write a book and start blogging even before that. I was blogging years before I ever wrote a book, and all of it came down to, damn it, I wish someone would just talk about this from an authentic and real voice and not pretend like they have all the answers. Because every other self-help book is no. If you follow my 10 steps, you will reach enlightenment or something along those lines.
Right.
And I'm not here to take anything away from that. Maybe that works for somebody. Maybe that has value. I'm not here to say what is or isn't good. That's not what this is at all. That's not what worked for me. That's not what speaks to my soul. I want to hear from somebody who is you know what? Fuck it. I've been through some shit. And here's how I try to come out the other side. And maybe it works for me, maybe it doesn't. But maybe you'll at least at a minimum be like, okay, at least someone else knows kind of what I'm feeling like. That's the minimum. And so that's and I realized, well, I can talk shit about other people or I can just go be better. It's that old Gandhi line of be the change you want to see in the world. I took that a bit too literally and decided to write. And so, like I said, I blogged for years. I still do. I still blog occasionally. And then I wrote a book. I'm working on book number 2, but all of that came from, and even the videos, it all comes from a place of, I want someone to speak on these topics in a way that actually makes sense to me and matters to me.
I remember the light bulb moment that happened when it was somebody, when I was going to partial hospitalization. We were going through so many different things on different CBT skills and all this other BS and all that. Not BS, but things that just kind of after a while, it seemed to be falling on mute ears, if you will. But someone finally said, like, positive affirmations are great if they work for you. I found out very quickly they were not my cup of tea. Waking up every morning and repeating the same 3 sentences did not bring me closer in my journey to being in a better mental state or being more active, to be in the moment and mindful. What it did was it pissed me off. It gave me more anxiety. I had to worry, did I check these off? This is now another checklist I have to do. It became so much more of a worry than an actual like stress reliever. And so it's very, very interesting to kind of go through and see what works and what doesn't. And I'm so glad that somebody talks about it, whether it's your book, whether it's your blog. Right now, the blog is The Battle You Know Not, I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. Thank you for knowing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's out there. I hardly ever advertise it. I basically only post about it when I write something, but like, feel free to go back and read it. And hell, the best part about it is like, there's shit that I wrote years ago that like I may not even agree with today, but I'm still gonna keep it up because like at that moment it felt real to me. It felt honest and it was genuine. I maybe have changed my perspective on that, but like it's still, I'm not gonna disagree with the fact that like in that moment it's what I felt. That's the thing about mental health to me that I'm so passionate about, is like it's not just the raw and authentic conversations. It's also about understanding that this is not a linear path. Like it's not like, if you think you're gonna walk into a therapist's office and go from A to B and be done with this, like it's not that simple. There's so much that goes into the mind and so much complexity into how we think, and it's so important that we give ourselves some grace and understand that, like, this is a process. But I want to go back to something you said though, which is that like you tried positive affirmation, it didn't work for you, it didn't give you the outcome that, but for other people, maybe that's what it is. That is the formula. I actually equate it a lot to like if your goal is like better physical health, right? So let's say it's weight loss, right? There's so many, you can read 27 different weight loss strategies. This is the move. Now this is the move. I think the more important thing is finding a move that works for you, that you'll actually commit to.
Mm-hmm.
And then sticking to it. Like that's actually a more valuable thing. So maybe your thing is intermittent fasting. Well, intermittent fasting at a scale is basically just a different way of saying I'm going to eat less calories, but here's the periods of time where I'm not going to do it. I'm not a dietitian. I can't speak to like how much that actually helps from like the metabolism and the things that it changes there. I'm talking about purely on calories in versus calories out. If you eat less meals over a period of time, you're probably going to lose some weight. But if that strategy works for you, fantastic. Or maybe like something I'm doing is like I'm working on high protein, high fiber because that keeps me more full, so I eat less things. That's what I'm trying to do. And it's thus far been working better for me than trying to minimize what I'm doing and live up to some unrealistic expectation of what I'm going to eat and not eat.
Yeah.
Instead, just making some tweaks that like make sense to me. And then same with like working out. Like if you think like, oh, I'm going to go do this workout thing that you've never done in your life, and all of a sudden you're going to commit to it 7 days a week, bullshit. I'm sorry. No, you're not. But if you find something you love, maybe it's dancing, maybe it's playing basketball, maybe it's just going on long walks and listening to audiobooks. Whatever the case, maybe find a way to integrate it into your life and make it natural. Something my wife does, like she loves the show Grey's Anatomy, and so she's been rewatching it, even though it's still live on air. But she's like, I won't walk on the. I won't watch the show unless I'm walking on the walking pad.
Mm.
So it's like, she intertwined it into her life. She wants to be able to watch that episode. Guess what? Gotta be on the walking pad. And that's a system that she found that worked for her.
Hey, that works then. It's so much of life is a trial and error, and whether it's your journey with your physical health, mental health, anything else, there's going to be ebbs and flows. I go back to what you said kind of right at the beginning of that people think they can walk into a therapist's office and, 3 or 6 months later, suddenly they're back and everything like that. And I really wish that was the formula. I wish, it was just kind of reset and all that. But I was actually just talking to my therapist today about you reach a point where you have to decide if this works for you or not. And he says that he sees it most of the time within 6 months of people going to therapy. And you can kind of see like, hey, is this something that's beneficial to you? And I think it's a lot of just with other things too. What are you going to put into it? Whether it's the Grey's Anatomy, walking pad, well, I'm sure that she could turn on the walking pad, or sit next to it, and technically it would be complete. But does that work for her? Then is it meeting her values and all that? So, um, I really, with my therapy journey, the point that I realized that things were kind of working is I was talking to him today about I reached a point where previously when I went to therapy, I would go there to ruminate, to basically just dump everything that's happened, and poor me, this is what's happening. Can you please solve my problem? And once it got to that point that I had to put some effort in, and I had to put in what I wanted to get out of it, I stopped. I went to a different therapist, or I stopped going to therapy. And so this time around, once I got to that point that said, okay, now I have some tools, I know what I want to do, and kind of that next step, okay, I'm in the right spot. Therapy's working for me at this point. It's something I wish was more accessible for everybody, but I do understand it as another tool that's not for everybody. So I think it's just finding that spot, whether it's walking or something else. You're gonna get out what you put into that.
No, 100%. And I think going into it with the mindset of like, something that like really opened my eyes was like, I saw going to therapist no different than like going to see a doctor about a sore throat. It's like, hey, here's the problem. Give me the one I need. We fix it. We're done. And it's not that transactional. So that's a huge part of the equation. But you said the right thing. You get out of it what you put into it. I had tried therapy a couple times earlier in my life, and I don't think I went into it with the right mindset. I think I went into it being like, all right, this is something my mom asked me to do, and I'll do it because I think it's probably right, but I don't know what I'm supposed to get out of this. And it was never going to stick that way. It wasn't until life kind of punched me in the mouth that I kind of had to. And then even then, I still was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to get out of this. But at least I was honest about that.
Yeah.
And coming to the table with that honesty and being able to say like, hey, like this is, that took me a long time. That's where actually like where the blog originally started from was I loved writing as a kid, and into my teenage years, and I love writing um, as a means to collect my thoughts. And so, but I hadn't really done it in a while, and then I was in therapy again, but like for real. Like I was like, I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to do what they say. I'm going to follow the path. At least I still don't know what I'm supposed to do here, but like I'm at least going to try.
Mm-hmm.
But I would get there and I didn't know what to say. And so I would sit down with the therapist, and then she could throw out the idea. I was like, hey, what if, the problem is you're getting here and you're on the spot. Like, what if in between now and our next session, like when something comes to your mind, just write it down and then start writing it. Or maybe like, here's some prompts, like write a letter to this or that, and get your mind going and start thinking about some things, and then bring that here and we can talk about it. And that was really really helpful. And then those kind of early letters, you could find that on my blog. Like I wrote a letter to a broken me. Looking back as a retrospective, that idea and that concept really kind of came to fruition that helped me achieve success in therapy and like kind of learn more about myself and learning that everything is interconnected. That's a huge part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate your vulnerability and talking about how therapy worked for you. I mean, I know vulnerability is a big thing for you. Just like when I go to therapy, I try to avoid, like I said, that rumination of going into the past too much and just dumping on there. But I like how you phrase it more so in a few things that you put out there as far as, you know, never be a prisoner of your past. And it was a lesson, not a life sentence. That just kind of spoke to me as far as, hey, this happened. It doesn't mean you have to be miserable the rest of your life. There's ways to go forward. So I guess if you want to expand a little bit on what never being a prisoner of your past means to you, because those words spoke to me, but I'd love to hear the perspective from the person that wrote them to me.
I wish I was clever enough to come up with that phrase. And I honestly, when I found it, it was one of those quotes that says like unknown. So I wish
Yeah.
if someone's listening to this and knows who originally wrote that, by all means, tell me, because I would love to give them credit. I just don't know who it is, but I know it wasn't me. So I want to be very clear about that too. I saw it written somewhere, and it spoke to me the same way I think that it spoke to you. Where it sits for me is I have done a lot of things in this life that I'm not proud of. And when I think about those moments in my life, you know, it's natural to look back as you grow and evolve and say, oh, I deserve what's coming to me based on these things. But nobody's perfect. No one is going to do it right every single time. And I'm not saying there aren't truly heinous things out there, but far from, barring you doing anything truly heinous in this world, there's a path for you to find this and find happiness. And so, but we get so caught up in these moments of saying I am this prisoner, I deserve what's coming to me, I deserve this unhappiness, I deserve this depression. And I want to go back to that kid who I knew, I look at the biggest part for me is in my early 20s. I was an arrogant prick, frankly. Anybody who's listening to this and knew me in my late teens, early 20s, can vouch for this. I thought I was the smartest person in every room, and I was cocky, and I was, and I'm sure there was natural parts that were true. I believed certain things about myself, but I needed everyone to believe how smart and awesome I was because I was insecure. That's the truth. I was deeply insecure, and I was so waiting to be unmasked. But I figured if I put enough confidence out there, and it wasn't confidence, that's arrogance. The difference is confidence you actually believe. Arrogance is what you fake in front of a bunch of people. And so, and I am confident that along the way that I hurt people and I was dishonest at times about who I was and what I could accomplish and all these things, and I just, because I couldn't live up to the expectation that I set in my own mind. I believed that I had to be exceptional because there's no other reason to love me. There's no other reason to want to be around me, right? And so I have to create this facade that exists in the world so that someone would actually give a shit about me. When all along, all anyone needed me to be was a good person. But I was dumb, frankly. I was a dumb person I didn't understand that concept yet. And so, so then as I get older, you start looking at that and you're like, God, it's one of those embarrassing moments where you kind of roll your eyes oh my God, it's cringe, I think as the kids would say. It's cringe.
Definitely an expert on what the kids say. No, but I think it is cringe. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's cringe. You look back and you're like, oh God, man, that person. I don't like that person, but it was part of my story.
Yeah.
So then later on, I would just kind of fall into this pit of despair of being whatever negativity comes my way, and then that spoils your anxiety, and that tends to keep you swirling, and then that leads to depression, and got to a point where I didn't want to be alive anymore. And so for me, that's what it is the ultimate prison. The ultimate prison of not wanting to be here anymore, But if I could look back and just go back and give that kid a hug and say, you're good enough just by existing. And all you needed to be was a good person, and everyone that it would be okay. And then, not everyone's going to like you. That's okay. That's not everyone's supposed to.
Yeah.
If I could just go back and give that kid a hug, I would gladly do that.
That would be nice. It's a hard thing to process that not everyone has to like you. It's very hard to drive through. I think especially the younger we are, or I don't know if age is exactly the thing, but it just seems really tough. I really really enjoyed when you started bringing up the whole, being a facade so that people will love you and accept you and all that stuff. And it really speaks to a lot of how I did so much in my life to make sure others were happy with how I was presenting. Still to this day, I have trouble sometimes with not, trying to make sure, oh, am I going to say the right thing that Will's going to like here? Is he going to, something like that. But I spent so much of my life thinking that if I didn't make other people happy, I wasn't providing anything to this world. Like,
Right.
and so, pair that with a lot of toxic masculinity where my, dad had taught me at some point through his actions and words and everything like that, that money and being a good provider, that meant you were a good man. And if you couldn't do those things, then what were you? So I just had so many things surrounding me going, why would anyone want to love you? And so trying to take that moment to step back and go, yeah, it would be nice to be able to go give my younger self a hug and go, hey, just be a good person, man. That would be really, really nice to do.
Yeah. It's hard. And so you have to grapple with that. And so, so I think remind yourself like the things that you're not proud of, the things in your life, the mistakes you make, all these things, like if you could just take a step back and say, this was a lesson. This is just a moment in time. And you can learn from it and you can grow from it and you can get better for it. Stop beating yourself up because you weren't perfect at every step of the way. Stop beating yourself up because you were a version of yourself you didn't like. I'm sure, like, even now, like, I feel really good about where things are at now, but I could very well in 10 years look back and be like, oh my God, look how stupid that guy was, And all of it's to say, like, we're all just a work in progress. That's it. We're all just a work in progress. And
I
so try
love
to be
that.
the best you can. Yeah.
Work in progress is a great way to really do that. I have, and just like a complete side, this is how my brain works, just things pop up out of nowhere. I have a little folder on my work desktop that just says WIP. And anytime I'm working on something that's not quite ready to be sent out, I just pop it in there. And so I try to look at myself like, hey, there are times that I'm myself in that work in progress folder and have to be okay that I'm not sending this out. So, uh, that was something that just kind of, like I said, popped off the top of my head. But I enjoy that work in progress metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge part of all of it for us. Life is one giant experiment. I had a teacher one time say to me, what he loves about being young is like everything is just research. But I think that's true even when you're in adulthood. Like everything in life is really, if you think about it, just research.
Yeah,
That's all it is. It's one giant experiment we're all hoping that we figure out. Some people think they've mastered it only to get reminded that they didn't. Other people never think they quite click and then one day it does. It's all just one giant experiment.
yeah. I mean, you go back to, I always forget the name of the researcher or author that wrote the whole series, like when he studied wolves and wrote about alphas and all that stuff, and like everyone bought into it, and he had to be like, no, I was completely wrong. Nobody believed this. Don't read this book, and it kind of just went on. So that's someone that dedicated their life to it, thought they were so certain in it that they published it out there. And I think it's big when you have to be like, take a step back, like, I was wrong, and don't believe everything I'm going to say.
Yeah. It speaks to your credibility, it speaks to all these different things. I think, it's so interesting in like corporate America as an example. Like, it's so easy to be like, I want to be the person who has all the answers. Because what is your goal there? Your goal is I
Mm-hmm.
have all the answers, so I can build trust, so I become the trusted advisor, so I become someone that people can lean on. And I think you can accomplish the same goal simply by saying, I don't know. I People are so afraid to say I don't know. And I think you can gain just as much trust with somebody by being honest about that and saying, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. You can gain so much credibility with somebody just for that mere ability, that humility to say, you know what? I have a feeling I know the answer, but either way, I want to be sure about this before I come back to you with this. Let me take some time to work on this, and I'll get back to you by the end of the day. Versus you spewing off some nonsense, and maybe you said it confidently, but you know you're not 100% sure if that's right, and it could very well be wrong, and you're going to lead them down an even darker path, and you lose that trust forever.
Yeah.
Just own it.
It speaks volumes when you're able to just be honest and lay it out there like, I might not have the answer right now. Let me get that to you later. And understanding that that person's not going to be upset with you, or maybe they will. And if they are, life's going to go on, and that's hard to
Right.
accept. But you said something about saying it so confidently and wanting to know the right answer. And that kind of leads me into, I'd like to ask people when, I know this is very new coming on and doing the interviews on my side and all that, but what is one question you want me to ask you? And so, like, I go to your confidence here. I want to know, because your question that you wanted me to ask was, what's something you think people get wrong about mental health? And I think that now that we just spoke about that confidence, I want to know the answer from Will Craig here. What is something that people get wrong about mental health?
Well, I can't use the confidence piece. That's one part that I always think people get wrong about mental health. I would say the other thing, too, though, that really stands out to me in today's world is I think there is a popular portion of the world who hear someone talk about insert mental illness and they view it as an excuse or an out to not have to go through life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's understandably so, because I believe that while there's that population, there also exists a percentage of people who do use it as an excuse. Hey, I have anxiety, so therefore I don't have to deal with any of my problems. The first step to fixing any problem is admitting there is one. You did that brave thing, and I applaud you for that. But now you have to do something about it. You have to work on it. And like you pointed out earlier, not everyone has access to therapy. I get that. I would love to live in a world where everyone could do that, but it's not that simple. But just because you don't have access to therapy doesn't mean that there aren't resources available to you. Doesn't mean that you can't go online and read about how different people have approached their anxiety and try to do better. That's what I love about, people can always talk about the flaws of social media, but one of the beautiful things that I have seen on social media is the people that say, hey, I have this and here's how I'm coping with it. And then someone else can go, wow, I tried that and it actually worked for me. And I'm not saying that that person's an expert and they don't deserve the credentialing for so. I think you play a very dangerous game of self-diagnosing through social media. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very, very dangerous game. But I love the idea that someone can say, I've suffered. Here's how I'm not suffering as much. Try that yourself and see if it works. Mm-hmm. And then someone can do that, and now they have a coping mechanism. And now they have something that can make them feel less alone, first off. But then the second part being, hey, I can have momentum now to work forward. And maybe eventually in their life they can work with a professional. They can do other things. But sometimes it's just getting that small win. So I challenge those who are like, hey, all these people these people didn't have these mental illnesses back in my day. No, they did. They just didn't know how to vocalize it.
Yeah.
And I challenge you to welcome those people that are dealing with that and say, hey, how can I help?
I think that's huge, and what you said about not using it as an excuse is very important to me. As soon as you said it, it set off a memory because my wife has said something very similar to me. She said, and I'm going to misquote her, so please know this is paraphrase, but she said, I don't want you going through life thinking that it's okay because you're an anxious person. It's okay that you're anxious, but your actions or lack of actions are not always going to be okay because you're an anxious person. She right. Came from a place where she was like, I don't want this to be your fallback. I don't want you to not grow because you have this. Yeah, it's great that you can learn about the mental illness and identify with it and be able to understand it. Don't let it be something that stops you from growing forward.
Absolutely. You owe it to yourself. Again, you did the brave thing. Like any person who learns something about this will say, hey, I am suffering from depression. I am suffering from any of these dark places. Like that is such a huge step in the right direction to be able to say, I have this, and it's something that is really hard for me to admit out loud. That's a really scary thing, and I applaud you for that. But as much as it pains me to say this to you, that's just the beginning of the journey. Like, great, you did that. Awesome. Now what? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to challenge yourself with? How are you going to be? I believe that, I think, I'm paraphrasing him, but Jim Carrey had a really great quote. He said, like, I believe that, depression is real, but if you don't get some sunshine and be around people, do other things, like, you're not giving yourself a fighting chance.
Correct. Yeah.
And there's so much truth in that. So it really like resonates with me when, people are, getting out there. So that's what I want to see. And so that's what I would challenge people in mental health, is to say, like, you have to take ownership of your healing.
I think it goes back to me, for me, of accepting two things to be true at the same time. I can accept that I'm a person that has anxiety and other things, but I can also accept that that's not going to be good enough to stop me from overcoming life. Like, if I just accept it and only this is true, I can't do anything else. Just this is true. So understanding that I have anxiety and I also have used anxiety as a crutch was a big wake up call for me to take some accountability and for me to grow and go, I've been kind of an asshole with this. I've let it kind of be the reason I can be an asshole. And so kudos to my wife for very bluntly calling me out a lot of the times when I do, because I need that. Sometimes I just need somebody to be like, you're kind of being a dick and it sounds like you're just kind of coasting here. So I definitely, it resonates highly with me.
Yeah. I think something my therapist says, like, it's like every time you go through, it's like new level unlocked, right? Like, so now you've got this level of like awareness. Great. Now what?
Yep. And it's all
Absolutely.
ebbs and flows. What's the next thing? So this has been such a great conversation. I look down at the counter here. I can't believe that we're creeping up on an hour of talking during the interview. Like, where does that time even go? Because, Will, you're someone I feel like I could just sit and we could chit chat and shoot the shit for hours and hours and never get tired. I mean, before this, we were even talking about the ridiculousness of dick pics and everything like that, and just
We were.
the ease it is to talk to you. I have to like say, just from a man to man, like, it's been so relieving to be able to talk to you and such an easy conversation to have today.
Well, feelings mutual, my friend. It is nice to have people that care so deeply about these topics and want to have these conversations. So I appreciate you for providing the space to do this and the platform to do that. Um, I'm happy to come back and do round 2, round 3, round 4, whenever you want to have more conversations. And who knows, maybe we'll look back and, 4 episodes from now, we can look back and be like, God, we were stupid. But it's okay to admit that, by the way. It's okay to admit that you were wrong.
It's all part about the ebbs and flows, and I look forward to you guys. Will does some Instagram lives. He's already invited me to do one of those, so I'm gonna for sure find a way to jump on there. You can find Will on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Depending on when this goes out, if TikTok is still around, you can find him there.
True.
Instagram live series, and I believe you had said that it's even recorded as a podcast for the podcast providers out there. So plenty of different ways. I don't know. I'm sure I missed something. Again, please check out his book, One Step Forward, Ideally in the Right Direction, on Amazon. It's 100% on my 2025 to read list. And so I guess, Will, is there any other things like your blog, anything else you want to kind of shout out before we wrap up the podcast part of this?
I would say 2 things. One, the book's only 96 pages, so that's the other beautiful thing too, is it's very easy to read. Um, the other thing too is shameless plug. I am currently working on and should be out by May or June my next book, which is called Don't Take It Personally.
That's really exciting. That's awesome. And May's a good month. It's my birthday month, so I'll always plug May as
Awesome.
a good month. So
Absolutely.
very much look forward to
Absolutely.
that. So I am going to be making sure those 96 pages are read before the second one comes out here. You've got a big fan of me, not just a fanboy that wants to talk to you on the podcast, but man to man, this has been awesome. I'm already pumped and my brain's coming out with ideas and thinking about the next time that we can chit chat. So again, everyone on the podcast, go find them. If you're on my Instagram, I try to share out as many things as I can. The spaces are underscores. I believe it's Mental Health with Will. Go find them there. I will link some videos. When I'm plugging this episode, a bunch of shorts I'm sure will come out. So, again, thank you, Will. And anything else you want to say before we depart here?
No, be kind to yourself, everybody. Be kind to yourself. Understand that it's all just a process. And Mikey, I look forward to seeing what else you do with this. You're a really, really kind human being, and I can't wait to see what else you accomplish with this.
I appreciate that. Before I gush to you all for another hour about how much of a fanboy of Will Craig I am, this is Mikey going back on mute. Until next time, thanks everybody. This episode of Mikey on Mute is brought to you by Little Jerk Society. Little Jerk Society is a clothing company fueled by the raw energy of creative rebellion, celebrating those who march to the beat of their own drum. They care deeply about mental health and believe in a world where everyone can thrive, regardless of their challenges. Use promo code MikeyOnMute to save 15% on your order at littlejerkclothing.com. Again, that's littlejerkclothing.com. And remember, use promo code MikeyOnMute, all one word, to save yourself 15%. Go off and make a change.